I'm Audrey Mitchell, 35, and 8 months ago I had everything: a thriving career as an investment advisor, a loving husband, two beautiful children, and our dream home in Boston. Today, I'm living in a roadside motel with nothing but a suitcase. My sister Brooke systematically stole my life, my husband Matthew, my prestigious job, even my children Emma and Noah. Just when I thought I'd lost everything, a mysterious letter arrived about my estranged Uncle Richard's passing. The lawyer's voice echoed through the phone. Your uncle left you everything, approximately $80 million. But there's a condition. Before I dive into how my life imploded and how I fought back, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had someone you trusted betray you. Trust me, this journey of betrayal and justice is one you won't want to miss. 8 months earlier, my life was picture perfect. I was a senior investment advisor at Wilson & Hartman, one of Boston's most prestigious financial firms. After 12 years of marriage, Matthew and I still had that spark that made our friends jealous. He was a successful attorney at a downtown law firm, handsome in that intellectual way with kind eyes behind stylish glasses. Our children, Emma, 10, and Noah, 7, were thriving in school and filled our lives with soccer games and science projects. We had the classic colonial home in an upscale Boston suburb, complete with the white picket fence and maple trees that blazed with color every fall. My days followed a comfortable rhythm: morning runs, school drop-offs, client meetings, family dinners, and weekend barbecues. I had worked hard for this life, climbing from a middle-class background to partnership track through sheer determination and financial acumen. Then Brooke arrived. My sister was 3 years younger, and we'd always had a complicated relationship. Where I was disciplined and methodical, Brooke was spontaneous and charming. While I built my career brick by careful brick, Brooke floated between jobs, relationships, and cities. She arrived at our doorstep on a rainy April evening, mascara streaking down her face, with a sob story about her latest divorce from a wealthy Miami real estate developer. It's just for a few weeks until I get back on my feet, she promised, wheeling her designer luggage into our guest room. You won't even know I'm here. Matthew insisted we help her. She's family, Audrey. What are we supposed to do, turn her away? I agreed, though with more reservations than I expressed. Throughout our lives, Brooke had a disturbing pattern of fixating on things I had, then somehow making them her own, from toys in childhood to boyfriends in college. But I dismissed these concerns as petty memories. We were adults now. I was secure in my life and marriage. The first red flags appeared subtly. I'd come home to find Brooke and Matthew laughing in the kitchen over inside jokes I wasn't part of. She began showing up at my office unannounced, bringing Matthew lunch since she was in the neighborhood. My colleagues commented on how charming my sister was, how much we looked alike despite her being the prettier version, comments she encouraged with a practiced modesty. Everyone at your office is so nice, Brooke gushed one evening. Harold was telling me all about the Rutherford acquisition your team is working on. Sounds fascinating. I froze. The Rutherford deal was confidential, not something Harold Wilson should be discussing with my unemployed sister. How did that come up? I asked carefully. She shrugged. Oh, you know how people love to talk about their work. I'm just a good listener. Matthew was working later and later, claiming a big case. When he came home, he'd immediately ask where Brooke was, his eyes scanning the room before fully entering. Twice I found them whispering, conversations that abruptly changed when I approached. You're being paranoid, I told myself. Brooke is just being friendly. Matthew is just being kind to family. But when Emma asked if Aunt Brooke could start picking her up from school because she lets her get ice cream first, the unease crystallized into something I couldn't ignore. Brooke was methodically inserting herself into every aspect of my life. One night, I woke at 2 a.m. to find Matthew's side of the bed empty. Padding downstairs, I heard low voices from my home office. The door was cracked open just enough for me to see Brooke leaning over my desk, my portfolio files spread open as Matthew pointed at something on the page. She'll never approach it this way, Brooke was saying. But that's where the real opportunity is. I cleared my throat and stepped in. They jumped apart like guilty teenagers. What are you doing with my client files? I demanded. Matthew ran a hand through his hair. Brooke was just helping me understand some investment concepts, for a case I'm working on. At 2 in the morning? with confidential client information? Brooke quickly gathered the papers. Don't be dramatic, Audrey. I was having trouble sleeping, and Matthew was just keeping me company. These were just out on your desk. They weren't. Those files had been locked in my drawer. As they shuffled past me with awkward goodnights, the perfect life I thought I had began to show its first major cracks. Something was very wrong, and I had the sinking feeling it was just the beginning. The Rutherford account was the biggest opportunity of my career. James Rutherford had built a tech company from his garage into a billion-dollar enterprise before selling it at 55 to enjoy early retirement. His $50 million portfolio would be the largest I'd ever managed, and landing him as a client would cement my path to full partnership at Wilson and Hartman. After weeks of meetings and presentations, Rutherford finally agreed to sign with us. We scheduled a celebration dinner at Sorellina, Boston's finest Italian restaurant. I spent the afternoon preparing final documents and choosing a conservative navy dress for the evening. Just as I was about to leave the office, my phone rang. It was Noah's school nurse. "Mrs. Mitchell, Noah had a fall during recess. He hit his head pretty hard." My heart stopped. "Is he okay? Do I need to take him to the hospital?" "He seems fine now, but school policy requires a parent to check him out personally after any head injury." I called Matthew immediately, but it went to voicemail. In a panic, I called our home line, where Brooke picked up. "I can't reach Matthew," I explained frantically. "I have a critical client dinner, but Noah had an accident at school." "Go to your dinner," Brooke said soothingly. "I'll handle Noah. It's just a bump, right? No emergency room needed?" "The nurse thinks he's okay, but someone needs to pick him up and monitor him." "I've got this, sis. This Rutherford dinner is too important. I'll take good care of Noah, promise." Relieved and grateful, I thanked her profusely before calling the school to authorize Brooke to pick up Noah. I texted my colleague Danielle, who was also attending the dinner, to let her know I'd be 30 minutes late but was still coming. When I arrived at Sorellina, the maitre d' led me to our private dining room. I pushed open the door, apology ready on my lips, only to freeze in confusion. Brooke was sitting in my place at the table, laughing with Harold Wilson, Elizabeth Hartman, and James Rutherford as if they were old friends. She was wearing a red dress I'd never seen before, her hair and makeup immaculate. "Audrey!" Harold looked up in surprise. "We weren't expecting you." Brooke explained about the emergency with Noah. "Noah is fine," I said slowly, eyes fixed on my sister. "Just a minor bump. Brooke was supposed to be watching him at home." "Oh, I asked Matthew to come home early," Brooke said smoothly. "I couldn't let you miss this dinner, so I came to explain in person. But then Mr. Rutherford was so interesting, and everyone insisted I stay." James Rutherford stood and shook my hand. "Your sister has been telling us about her fascinating approach to emerging markets, quite innovative." I felt like I'd stepped into an alternate reality. Her approach? "I was just sharing some ideas," Brooke said with false modesty. "Things we've discussed, remember?" We had never discussed emerging markets, ever. As the evening progressed, it became clear that Brooke had somehow presented my investment strategy for Rutherford's portfolio as her own, with enough modifications to make it sound fresh. Worse, she'd clearly studied my confidential files, spouting specific numbers and projections I'd spent weeks developing. The next morning, I confronted her in the kitchen before the kids woke up. "How could you do that?" "Those were my clients, my strategies." "How did you even know about the dinner?" Brooke's eyes widened in practiced innocence. "I was just helping you out. Noah needed someone, and I didn't want you to miss the dinner." Then, when I arrived, Harold assumed I was filling in for you. What was I supposed to do, embarrass everyone by leaving? You could have told the truth. And how did you know all those details about Rutherford's portfolio? She shrugged. "You talk about work all the time. I pick things up. I'm not stupid, Audrey, even if you've always treated me like I am." Before I could respond, Matthew entered. "What's going on?" When I explained, he frowned. "Sounds like Brooke was just trying to help, and now you're attacking her?" "She watched Noah for you, Audrey." "She took credit for my work. She accessed confidential client information." "Don't be ridiculous. Brooke doesn't even work in finance." But the damage was done. Later that day, Harold called me into his office. "James Rutherford was impressed with your sister. Very impressed. He's actually requested that she be involved in managing his account." I stared in disbelief. Brooke doesn't work here. She doesn't have credentials or experience. Well, about that. Harold looked uncomfortable. We're considering bringing her on. Her background in client relations could be valuable. Client relations? She worked as a hotel concierge for 6 months 3 years ago. Harold's expression hardened. She has an economics degree from UCLA and worked at Morgan Stanley before her marriage. That was a blatant lie. Brooke had a communications degree from a state college and had never worked at any financial institution. But when I tried to explain this, Harold accused me of being competitive with my sister. The final blow came that evening. As I was working late, trying to salvage the Rutherford situation, Danielle from the compliance department knocked on my door. Audrey, I shouldn't be telling you this, but HR is preparing an offer letter for your sister. Full investment advisor position, directly under Harold. That's impossible, I whispered. Danielle hesitated. There's more. She had references from Morgan Stanley. I was curious, so I called to verify. They've never heard of her. That night, I came home early, determined to catch Brooke. I found her in my home office again, this time photographing documents from my personal files. She didn't even look guilty when I confronted her. You've always had everything handed to you, Audrey. The perfect career, the perfect husband, the perfect kids. Maybe it's my turn now. It wasn't a slip of the mask. It was the first time I saw my sister's true face. By the following week, Brooke had an office 3 doors down from mine. Harold Wilson personally announced her hiring, praising her fresh perspective and wealth of experience, all fabrications that no one bothered to verify. She was assigned junior clients to start, but I could see her eyes fixed on my client roster. The first incident happened 2 weeks after she started. I had prepared a detailed analysis for the Henderson portfolio, recommending a significant reallocation based on market projections. The morning of my presentation, the numbers in my slides didn't match my notes. The recommendation showed a potential 3% loss rather than the 7% gain my calculations had shown. These projections seem concerning, Mrs. Henderson said, frowning at the screen. I was baffled, checking my original documents in confusion. This isn't right. These aren't my numbers. After an awkward recovery, I returned to my office and found the original file had been modified the previous evening, at 8:47 p.m., when I had been at Emma's school concert. When I reported the unauthorized access to IT, they conducted an investigation that went nowhere. The security logs show your credentials were used, the IT director explained. And unfortunately, the hallway camera footage from that time frame was accidentally overwritten. It wasn't the last accident. Over the next month, emails to clients were delayed or never arrived. Documents contained subtle errors. Trading orders were executed incorrectly. Each time, the system showed my credentials had been used. Meanwhile, Brooke was thriving. In meetings, she began making casual comments. Audrey's been so stressed lately, or family issues can really affect concentration, can't they? When clients questioned discrepancies, she was always there to smoothly take over. Let me double-check those numbers for you while Audrey gets herself organized. At home, the situation was equally disturbing. I'd come back from a grocery run to find Brooke helping Emma with homework, work I had already helped with the night before. Aunt Brooke explained it better, Emma said innocently when I questioned her. She said, "You're probably too tired from work to focus properly." Noah began asking if Brooke could take him to soccer practice instead of me. She lets me get McDonald's after, and she doesn't just sit on her phone the whole time. I never sat on my phone during his practices. I never even brought my phone. Matthew was increasingly Brooke's defender. The kids adore her. Why are you being so competitive? This is good for our family. I felt like I was losing my mind, questioning reality as everyone around me seemed to accept Brooke's alternate version of events. The only person who believed me was Danielle from compliance. "I saw her at your computer last week," Danielle confided one day, pulling me into the supply room to speak privately. It was late, around 7 p.m. She said you had asked her to finish a report, but I noticed she was actually in your email. Finally, evidence I wasn't imagining things. Did anyone else see? No, and when I mentioned it casually to Elizabeth, she brushed it off. Brooke has really charmed the partners. The sabotage escalated. Client complaints mounted. Harold called me into a meeting where Elizabeth Hartman was also present. Audrey, we're concerned about your performance lately, Harold began. There have been multiple errors in your work, missed meetings, and client complaints. Those weren't my errors, I insisted. Someone has been accessing my computer, changing my files. I think it's Brooke. Elizabeth sighed. Audrey, accusing a colleague, especially your own sister, without evidence is serious. We understand you're going through personal issues. What personal issues? Elizabeth looked uncomfortable. Brooke mentioned you've been having marital problems, that Matthew is, well, unhappy. The betrayal struck like a physical blow. I hadn't told anyone about my concerns regarding Matthew and Brooke. Either Elizabeth was lying or Brooke was spreading rumors about my marriage. That's not true, I said, my voice shaking. None of it is true. But they didn't believe me. By the end of the meeting, I was placed on a performance improvement plan, the corporate precursor to termination. That evening, I drove home early, unannounced. Matthew's car and Brooke's were both in the driveway, though he should have been at work. The house was quiet when I entered. Too quiet. On instinct, I checked Matthew's phone, left carelessly on the kitchen counter. His text messages to Brooke were open. Matthew, is she still at work? Brooke, yes. Performance review today. Should be occupied for hours. Matthew, I miss you already. Last night was incredible. Brooke, soon we won't have to hide, I promise. My hands trembled as reality crashed down around me. This wasn't just workplace sabotage. This was the systematic destruction of my entire life. I waited in the kitchen, Matthew's phone still in my hand, until I heard footsteps on the stairs. They were laughing about something, Brooke's hand casually resting on my husband's arm. When they saw me, they froze like deer in headlights. Audrey, Matthew recovered first. You're home early. I held up his phone, screen still displaying the incriminating messages. Apparently I'm right on time. What followed was a confrontation that would permanently alter the course of my life. After initially denying everything, Matthew finally dropped the pretense. It wasn't supposed to happen this way, he said, not meeting my eyes. Brooke and I, we have a history. A history? I repeated numbly. That's when the full truth emerged. Matthew and Brooke had known each other before he and I ever met. They had connected on social media during college, had a brief but intense relationship, and then Brooke had ended it to pursue a wealthy older man. I met you 6 months later, Matthew admitted. You were kind, stable, ambitious, everything she wasn't. The implication hung in the air, sickening and clear. I had always been his second choice. So the past 12 years of our marriage were what? A backup plan? My voice sounded distant to my own ears. I did love you, Audrey, he said, as if that somehow made it better. But when Brooke came back into my life, those old feelings never really went away. Brooke, who had remained silent, finally spoke. We didn't plan this, Audrey. It just happened. Some connections are just meant to be. The callousness of their justifications was almost as painful as the betrayal itself. They spoke as if they were characters in some romantic drama, rather than two people destroying a family. And the kids? I asked. Were they part of your plan too, using them against me? Matthew had the decency to look ashamed, but Brooke showed no such remorse. Emma and Noah adore me, she said simply. Children naturally gravitate toward happiness, and our home has been tense since I arrived. That's hardly my fault. I called my parents that night, desperate for support, but they too had fallen under Brooke's spell. Are you sure you're not overreacting? My mother asked. Brooke said you've been working too much, neglecting Matthew and the children. She's sleeping with my husband, Mom. She's systematically destroying my career. Well, my father chimed in awkwardly, marriages go through rough patches. And Brooke mentioned you've been having some trouble at work. Maybe this is a cry for help from Matthew. I hung up, stunned by their willingness to accept Brooke's version of reality over their own daughters. For 2 agonizing weeks, I lived in the guest bedroom of my own home, trying to maintain normalcy for Emma and Noah while navigating the wreckage of my marriage. Matthew and Brooke were careful to be discreet around the children, but the damage was already done. Emma had become withdrawn around me, while Noah peppered me with innocent but devastating questions. Why don't you make Daddy laugh like Aunt Brooke does? Aunt Brooke said you might be moving away for work. Are you leaving us? I hadn't said anything about moving. At work, the situation deteriorated further. Major client accounts were mysteriously reassigned to other advisors, primarily Brooke. When I questioned Harold, he cited client preferences and my ongoing performance issues. My office was relocated to a smaller space near the file room, while Brooke moved into a corner office with city views. The final professional blow came when I discovered Brooke had forged my signature on regulatory documents, effectively transferring authorization for several client accounts. When I brought this to Elizabeth Hartman's attention with clear evidence, she seemed troubled, the first sign anyone had taken my concerns seriously. "These are serious allegations, Audrey. Let me speak with Harold and launch a proper investigation." The next day, I arrived at work to find 2 security guards waiting at my desk. Harold stood nearby, his expression grave. "Audrey, we need your company ID and devices. We're terminating your employment effective immediately for ethical violations." "What violations?" I demanded, as heads turned throughout the office. "Falsifying client signatures, attempting to access accounts without authorization, and making threatening statements about another employee." It was everything Brooke had done, now being attributed to me. "This is insane," I protested. "Elizabeth was just launching an investigation into Brooke's misconduct yesterday." Harold's expression hardened. "Elizabeth recused herself from any investigation involving you, given your public hostility toward your sister. The evidence against you is conclusive." As security escorted me out, I saw Brooke watching from her office doorway, a small smile playing at her lips. That evening, I returned home to find the locks changed and my belongings piled in the driveway, already damp from the light rain that had begun to fall. A manila envelope contained divorce papers, with Matthew seeking full custody of our children based on my increasingly erratic and concerning behavior and potential financial improprieties. Standing there in the rain, watching neighbors peek through curtains at my humiliation, I realized I had lost everything: my marriage, my career, my home, potentially even my children, in less than 2 months. With nowhere else to go, I checked into the Moonlight Motel, a roadside establishment that rented rooms by the week. Using my emergency credit card, the only one not yet canceled, I paid for 7 nights and carried my suitcase into a room that smelled of industrial cleaner and old cigarettes. Sitting on the sagging bed, I finally allowed myself to cry. The Moonlight Motel became my reluctant home. Room 118, with its faded floral wallpaper and temperamental plumbing, was a far cry from the colonial house I'd lost. I stretched my remaining funds by eating ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches, taking inventory of how completely my life had collapsed. Matthew's divorce filing was breathtaking in its viciousness. Beyond seeking full custody, it painted me as mentally unstable, financially irresponsible, and potentially dangerous. My own husband claimed I had exhibited paranoid tendencies and made unfounded accusations against family members out of jealousy. The custody allegations hurt most. Respondent has demonstrated erratic behavior around the minor children, including making disparaging comments about their aunt and father, causing emotional distress. I had done no such thing, always careful to shield Emma and Noah from the adult conflict. But when I called them, Noah's small voice was hesitant. "Dad says you're sick and need time to get better." Emma wouldn't come to the phone at all. My bank accounts were frozen due to potential financial impropriety, Brooke's doing, no doubt. Credit cards canceled. Even my personal investment accounts were inaccessible. The small emergency fund I'd hidden in a separate bank was my only resource, dwindling daily. Job applications went nowhere. The investment community in Boston was too small, and word had spread about my ethical violations. One sympathetic former colleague texted, "Brooke is telling everyone you had a breakdown. No one will touch you." I watched from my car across the street as Brooke hosted Emma's birthday party at my house. Pink balloons tied to the mailbox, children's laughter drifting through open windows. When Emma stepped outside, she looked happy, untroubled, already adapting to life without her mother. Depression settled over me like a physical weight. I slept through days, barely eating, wondering if it might be easier to simply disappear. One night, after my phone was disconnected for non-payment, I seriously contemplated ending it all, staring at the pill bottle in my trembling hand. A knock at the door startled me back to reality. "Audrey Mitchell?" An older gentleman with kind eyes and a weathered face stood outside. "I'm Calvin Wagner. I was a friend of your Uncle Richard Bennett. I hadn't thought about Uncle Richard in years. My mother's eccentric brother had distanced himself from the family long before I was born, making him more legend than relative. Uncle Richard? I asked, confused. I barely knew him. But he knew you, Calvin replied. May I come in? Calvin explained that Richard had passed away 3 weeks earlier. He kept tabs on the family, though they didn't know it. He was aware of your situation. My situation? The systematic destruction of your life by your sister. For the first time in weeks, someone believed me. The validation alone brought tears to my eyes. Richard left instructions to contact you, but only when things got desperate. Based on your current accommodations, I'd say we've reached that point. Calvin offered me temporary housing in a small apartment he owned. It's nothing fancy, but it's clean and safe. Richard would want you to have a proper base of operations. Operations for what? For fighting back, of course. The next day, Calvin drove me to meet with Lawrence Jenkins, the attorney handling Richard's estate. The law office was understated but elegant, much like Jenkins himself. Miss Mitchell, your uncle was a remarkable man, Jenkins began. Successful investor, philanthropist, and excellent judge of character. He left behind a substantial estate valued at approximately $80 million. I blinked in surprise. I had no idea he was wealthy. Few did. He preferred it that way. Jenkins slid a folder across the desk. You are his sole heir. Hope flickered for the first time in weeks. With resources, I could fight the divorce, hire proper representation, expose Brooks' machinations. However, Jenkins continued, the inheritance comes with conditions. Of course it did. Nothing in my life was simple anymore. Your uncle called it his justice project. He believed in cosmic balance, that those who do harm must face consequences, but through justice, not vengeance. The conditions were laid out in a detailed document. I would receive the full inheritance only after completing a specific sequence of actions designed to expose Brooks' true nature and reclaim what was rightfully mine, but without descending to her level of deception and cruelty. Why would Uncle Richard care so much about my situation? I asked. Jenkins handed me a leather-bound journal. Richard left this for you. It explains everything. That night, in Calvin's spare apartment, I read Richard's journal by lamplight. The entries spanned decades, revealing a man who had observed our family from afar with remarkable insight. The most shocking revelation came halfway through. Brooke was not my biological sister. The 14th of April, 1988. My sister Louise and her husband adopted an infant girl today after their recent miscarriage. They've named her Brooke and plan to raise her as their own, never telling her or their biological daughter Audrey about the adoption. I advised against this deception, but was overruled. Further entries documented Brooke's troubling behavior patterns from childhood. The 3rd of July, 1997. Witnessed disturbing incident at family gathering. 9-year-old Brooke deliberately broke Audrey's science project, then cried and claimed Audrey had pushed her into it. The adults believed her performance entirely. The child shows early signs of manipulation that concern me deeply. Richard had recognized Brooke's dangerous nature early and watched with growing alarm as she matured into an accomplished manipulator. He documented multiple instances of her identity theft, relationship sabotage, and financial fraud across several cities. She leaves destruction in her wake, moving on to new victims when the old life collapses. Her targets are usually successful women whose identities she can appropriate, their careers, relationships, even mannerisms. Audrey, being family, has always been her ultimate objective. The final entries described Richard's declining health and his determination to create a safety net for me. I've structured my estate to provide Audrey resources when Brooke makes her inevitable move. My own experience with betrayal taught me that justice requires patience, evidence, and strategic timing. Audrey has the intelligence and strength to rebuild. She just needs the tools. The next morning, Jenkins provided access to a modest account for project expenses and directed me to a storage unit Richard had maintained. Inside, I found meticulously organized evidence of Brooke's past cons, documentation that proved her UCLA economics degree was forged, her claimed employment history fabricated, and her pattern of relationship destruction well established. For the first time since my world collapsed, I felt something other than despair. I felt purpose. Your uncle believed you would prevail, Calvin told me as we sorted through the materials. He recognized the same strength in you that he had, the ability to rebuild from ashes without losing your humanity. That night, I spread Richard's documents across the apartment floor, combining them with my own records of Brooke's sabotage. Patterns emerged. Vulnerabilities revealed themselves. A plan began to take shape. Richard had left me more than money. He'd left me a roadmap back to justice. Uncle Richard Bennett had been the family's black sheep, existing on the periphery of my childhood as an occasional reference rather than a presence. I had vague memories of a tall man with thoughtful eyes visiting once when I was very young, bringing unusual gifts: a kaleidoscope filled with butterfly wings, a music box that played unfamiliar melodies. He had argued with my parents that day about what I couldn't recall and never returned. Now, through his journals and Calvin's stories, I was meeting the real Richard, brilliant investor, careful observer, and apparently my guardian angel. Richard made his fortune in tech investments in the 80 seconds and 90 seconds, Calvin explained as we reviewed the inheritance documents. But he was an anthropologist by training, fascinated by human behavior patterns. That's how he spotted Brooke's nature early on. Lawrence Jenkins elaborated on the inheritance terms during our next meeting. The $80 million is held in trust, with immediate access to $100,000 for living expenses and project implementation. The full amount transfers to you upon successful completion of the Justice Project. And if I fail? I asked. Richard was confident you wouldn't, Jenkins replied. But in that unlikely event, the money goes to a foundation for victims of identity theft and financial fraud. The Justice Project had specific parameters. I needed to 1. Gather concrete evidence of Brooke's fraudulent activities. 2. Recover my professional reputation through legitimate means. 3. Regain custody of my children. 4. Ensure Brooke faced appropriate consequences for her actions. The key stipulation, Jenkins emphasized, is that you cannot employ Brooke's methods. No deception, no forgery, no manipulation. Richard believed justice achieved through dishonorable means isn't justice at all. I spent days absorbing Richard's journals, piecing together the family history I'd never known. The adoption revelation was staggering. Brooke wasn't biologically related to me at all. According to Richard's entries, my parents had adopted her after a devastating miscarriage when I was 3. They'd never told either of us, determined to raise her as their natural child. Louise insists the girls never know the truth, Richard wrote. I believe secrets like this poison families from within, but my concerns are dismissed as usual. Richard had distanced himself from the family after this decision but continued monitoring from afar. When Brooke's troubling behavior patterns emerged, he began documenting everything, eventually hiring private investigators to track her activities into adulthood. The storage unit contained evidence of Brooke's previous identities and cons. In Seattle, she'd been Brooke Lawson, insinuating herself into an advertising executive's life before stealing her boyfriend and business contacts. In Chicago, she'd been Brooke Williams, befriending a gallery owner whose reputation and social circle she systematically appropriated. Each time, she'd moved on before legal consequences caught up with her. Richard called it her identity absorption pattern, Calvin explained. She finds successful women whose lives she covets, studies them intensely, then gradually replaces them. But why? I asked. She's intelligent, attractive, she could build her own success. Richard believed it stemmed from her unconscious knowledge of being adopted. A deep-seated insecurity about her real identity, combined with narcissistic tendencies. Building feels less authentic to her than taking. The most disturbing revelation was that my marriage had been targeted from the beginning. According to Richard's investigation, Brooke and Matthew had indeed dated briefly in college, but their chance reconnection years later was no accident. She had deliberately tracked him down after her divorce, maintaining secret contact for months before her dramatic arrival at our doorstep. The long con, Calvin called it. She's patient when the prize is valuable enough. Another journal entry sent chills down my spine. Brooke has accessed Audrey's medical records through an ex-boyfriend who works in healthcare administration. She studied Audrey's psychological profile, looking for vulnerabilities. This level of calculation is deeply concerning. The inheritance included another unexpected resource. Uncle Richard's friendship with James Rutherford, the client whose account had started Brooke's takeover of my career. Richard and James were old friends, Jenkins explained. Richard never told James about your situation directly, but he did suggest keeping a close eye on any new advisors at your firm. Armed with this knowledge and Richard's resources, I moved from Calvin's spare room to a small but decent apartment, purchased a used car, and began methodically planning my comeback. The despair that had nearly overwhelmed me transformed into focused determination. Richard's final journal entry, dated just weeks before his death, seemed written directly to me. Audrey will face her greatest challenge soon. Brooke has accelerated her timeline, sensing my attention to the situation. I may not live to see the resolution, but I've put everything in place that Audrey will need. She has always possessed what Brooke lacks: genuine strength of character and the capacity for honest connection. These qualities, combined with strategic thinking, will ultimately prevail over Brooke's hollow manipulations. Justice will come, not through matching Brooke's darkness, but by bringing everything into the light. As I closed the journal, I felt Richard's presence like a guiding hand. He had recognized the threat to my life long before I had, prepared for it meticulously, and now offered me a path forward. That night, I drafted my own journal entry, a reply to my uncle across the divide. I didn't know you in life, Uncle Richard, but I feel I know you now. Thank you for seeing what others missed, for believing in me when everything seemed lost. I will use your gift wisely and make you proud. The Justice Project begins tomorrow. My small apartment became command central for Operation Reclaim My Life. Using the initial funds from Richard's inheritance, I furnished it minimally but functionally: a desk, comfortable bed, filing cabinets, and a top-of-the-line laptop with security features that would make the Pentagon proud. First order of business: gathering intelligence. I hired Thomas Reeves, a private investigator recommended in Richard's files, to document Brooke and Matthew's activities. I need everything, I told him. Where they go, who they meet with, phone records if you can get them legally, and especially any financial transactions. Custody cases can get messy, Reeves commented, assuming my motivation. This goes beyond custody, I explained. I believe they're engaged in multiple forms of fraud. Within 2 weeks, Reeves delivered his first report. The findings confirmed my suspicions but contained a shocking new development. Your sister has been making regular transfers from James Rutherford's investment account to an offshore account in the Caymans, Reeves explained, pointing to the transaction records. Small amounts each time, but they add up to nearly $300,000 over the past month. She wasn't just stealing my identity, she was embezzling from clients. How did you get this information? I asked, concerned about using illegally obtained evidence. All above board, Reeves assured me. I have a contact at the Regulatory Commission who flagged unusual patterns in Rutherford's account. These records would be available in any official investigation. The second bombshell came a few days later. Matthew and Brooke were planning a destination wedding in the Bahamas, just 3 months after he'd filed for divorce from me. Even more disturbing, they intended to bring Emma and Noah, potentially as part of the wedding party. They're accelerating their timeline, I noted, remembering Richard's similar observation before his death. Brooke wants to cement her position legally before anything can threaten it. While Reeves continued his investigation, I focused on reconnecting with my children. Direct contact was difficult. Matthew had convinced a judge that my communications should be supervised due to my unstable condition, but the court hadn't prohibited written correspondence. I began sending Emma and Noah carefully crafted letters 3 times a week. Nothing accusatory or negative about Brooke or Matthew that would only confirm their narrative about my instability. Instead, I sent stories, memories, gentle reminders of my love, and small, thoughtful gifts that would resonate with each child's interests. For Noah, who loved space, I found vintage NASA mission patches. For Emma, passionate about marine life, I sent beautiful seashells with handwritten cards explaining each one's origins. Gifts small enough not to be interpreted as bribery, but meaningful enough to maintain our connection. 3 weeks in, the first breakthrough came. My phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Mom? Noah's small voice came through the speaker. My heart leaped. Noah, oh sweetheart, it's so good to hear your voice. I'm using Dad's iPad, he whispered. He's in the shower. I'm not supposed to call you. That's okay, I said, keeping my voice calm despite my racing pulse. I'm just happy to talk to you. How are you doing? I miss you, he said simply. Dad says you're sick and need to be alone, but you don't sound sick. I'm not sick, honey. Sometimes grown-ups have complicated disagreements, but nothing about this is your fault. And I'm working very hard to see you again soon. Emma misses you too, he confided. She cries sometimes when she thinks no one can hear, but she pretends to like Aunt Brooke because Dad gets mad if we don't. The call lasted only 4 minutes before Noah had to go, but it was enough to renew my determination. My children hadn't forgotten me. The bond remained intact despite all of Brooke's efforts. Meanwhile, I was laying groundwork for my professional rehabilitation. Using Richard's detailed records of Brooke's past identities, I compiled a comprehensive case showing her pattern of fraud, complete with documentation of her forged credentials and falsified employment history. I also began developing a business plan for my own independent financial advisory firm. If I couldn't reclaim my position at Wilson & Hartman, I would build something new, something founded on the ethical principles Richard had valued. 6 weeks into my strategic comeback, Reeves called with urgent news. I've confirmed your sister is planning to clean out Rutherford's account. The entire $50 million. She's scheduled the transfers for next week, using forged authorization documents. This was the opportunity I'd been waiting for. With Reeves's evidence in hand, I requested a meeting with James Rutherford directly, circumventing Wilson & Hartman entirely. Rutherford, a shrewd businessman despite his retirement, agreed to meet me at his Back Bay penthouse. He listened impassively as I presented the evidence of Brooke's embezzlement and my own unceremonious removal from the firm. Richard Bennett was one of the few honest men I've known in business, Rutherford said when I finished. When he suggested I keep an eye on any new advisors at Wilson & Hartman, I should have been more vigilant. Instead, I was charmed by your sister. She's very good at what she does, I acknowledged. She's had years of practice. Rutherford studied the documentation, particularly the evidence of the planned $50 million transfer. What do you propose? Let her believe the transfer is proceeding as planned, I suggested. But with regulatory authorities monitoring in real time, it's the only way to catch her definitively. A slow smile spread across Rutherford's face. You're as strategic as Richard said. I'm in. With Rutherford's cooperation, we set the trap. But just as things were coming together, a text arrived on my new phone from an unknown number. I know what you're doing. Back off now, or you'll never see your children again. This isn't a threat, it's a promise. B. My first instinct was fear, but it quickly hardened into resolve. Brooke was getting nervous, which meant my plan was working. Rather than backing down, I accelerated the timeline. The text from Brooke confirmed what I already suspected. She had someone watching me. It also told me something crucial. She was scared. My carefully orchestrated comeback was threatening her perfectly constructed new life. Instead of retreating, I moved forward aggressively. The next morning, I requested an urgent meeting with Harold Wilson and Elizabeth Hartman. To my surprise, they agreed to see me, likely out of curiosity than any sense of obligation. You have 15 minutes, Harold said coolly as I entered the conference room at Wilson and Hartman. Elizabeth sat beside him, her expression unreadable. That's all I need, I replied, opening my laptop. For the next 13 minutes, I presented irrefutable evidence of Brooke's elaborate fraud, her forged UCLA credentials, falsified employment records, and most damning documentation of her systematic embezzlement from client accounts, including Rutherford's. The Securities and Exchange Commission has been notified, I concluded. They'll be here this afternoon with a warrant to examine all records related to Brooke Mitchell's activities. I'm giving you this courtesy heads-up so you can prepare accordingly. Harold's face had gone from dismissive to ashen. These are serious allegations. They're not allegations, Harold. They're facts, meticulously documented. Facts you would have discovered with even minimal due diligence before hiring her. Elizabeth, always the more pragmatic partner, cut to the chase. What do you want, Audrey? I want nothing from this firm. You made your choice. But I would suggest immediate internal controls on all accounts Brooke has accessed before the SEC freezes everything. As I gathered my materials to leave, Elizabeth asked the question Harold was too stunned to articulate. How did you put all this together? I had help from someone who recognized Brooke's pattern long before I did. I paused at the door. Oh, and if I were you, I'd check the Rutherford account immediately. The transfer she scheduled for tomorrow would have emptied it completely. By the time I reached my car, my phone was buzzing with text messages from Matthew, increasingly frantic demands to call him immediately. I ignored them all. My next stop was the family court, where I filed an emergency petition for temporary custody, supported by new evidence of Matthew's complicity in Brooke's financial crimes and documentation of their plans to take the children out of the country. Judge Harriet Coleman, known for her no-nonsense approach to family cases, reviewed my petition immediately. "These are extraordinary circumstances, Miss Mitchell," she said, studying the evidence. "I'm particularly concerned about the international travel plans without your knowledge or consent." She issued an emergency order prohibiting Matthew from removing the children from Massachusetts and scheduled a full hearing for the following week. More importantly, she granted me supervised visitation rights, effective immediately. As I left the courthouse, Reeves called with breaking news. The SEC had arrived at Wilson and Hartman with federal agents. Brooke was being questioned, and accounts were being frozen across the board. Everything was unfolding according to plan, but the most crucial phase was yet to come. According to Reeves's intelligence, Brooke and Matthew had booked flights to the Bahamas for early the next morning, tickets for 4, including Emma and Noah, despite the custody arrangement allowing only weekend visitations. They're planning to run, I realized. They know the authorities are closing in. I immediately notified Judge Coleman's office, the police, and the airport security. Then I positioned myself at the terminal where they would likely enter, Reeves stationed at a secondary entrance as backup. At 5:47 a.m., they arrived, Matthew guiding a sleepy Noah, Brooke holding Emma's hand. 4 rolling suitcases, far more than needed for a weekend trip. They headed straight to the international check-in counter. I nodded to the plainclothes officers positioned nearby and approached. "Going somewhere?" I asked calmly. Brooke whirled around, her expression momentarily shocked before settling into calculated warmth. "Audrey, what a coincidence. We're just taking a little family vacation." "With my children? Without court approval? During a federal investigation?" Matthew stepped forward, positioning himself between me and the kids. "This is harassment. We have every right to travel." "Actually, you don't," I replied as 2 officers moved toward us. "Judge Coleman issued an order yesterday prohibiting removal of the children from the state." Emma spotted me then, her eyes widening. "Mom?" For the first time in months, there was hope rather than confusion in her voice. Brooke gripped Emma's shoulder tightly. "Your mother is confused, sweetie. Remember what we talked about? How she gets these ideas sometimes?" That's when a third person joined our group, James Rutherford, arriving right on schedule. "Miss Mitchell," he addressed Brooke, "I'm a bit concerned about the transfer you processed from my account yesterday. The one you said was routine reallocation?" Brooke's composure wavered visibly. "Mr. Rutherford, this isn't the place. The SEC seems very interested in that transfer," he continued conversationally, as if discussing the weather, particularly since I never authorized it. Noah broke free from Matthew's grip and ran to me. I knelt to embrace him, fighting back tears as his small arms wrapped around my neck. "I knew you'd come," he whispered. Brooke's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. "Matthew, do something," she demanded. But Matthew was already backing away, his self-preservation instinct kicking in. "You said this was just a vacation," he muttered. "You didn't tell me about any transfer." Her eyes darted frantically between Matthew's retreating form, the approaching officers, and Rutherford's steady gaze. In that moment, Brooke made a fatal miscalculation. "This is all your fault," she shrieked at me, lunging forward. "You couldn't just stay broken, could you? You had to ruin everything." The officers intercepted her before she reached me, but the damage was done. Her public meltdown was witnessed by dozens of travelers, several of whom were already recording on their phones. "Emma, come here," Brooke commanded, struggling against the officers. "Tell them how your mother abandoned you." But Emma, eyes wide with realization, moved to stand beside me and Noah. As Brooke was escorted away, still shouting accusations, Matthew attempted to approach the children. "Emma, Noah, you know I love you. This is all a misunderstanding." Emma, showing wisdom beyond her 10 years, took Noah's hand protectively. "Is it true what Mom said? Were you going to take us away without telling her?" His hesitation was answer enough. Within the hour, Brooke was in custody for financial fraud and attempted child abduction. Matthew, though not arrested, was served with court papers and a restraining order. And for the first time in months, I held both my children in my arms, their tears soaking my shoulders as they clung to me with desperate relief. "I never stopped fighting for you," I whispered to them. "I never will." As we left the airport, Emma looked up at me with eyes so like my own. "Is it over now, Mom? Really over?" I thought of the long road ahead, custody hearings, financial rebuilding, emotional healing. But the worst was indeed behind us. "The hardest part is over," I promised her. Now, we start putting our lives back together. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of our new home, a comfortable colonial not unlike our previous house, but untainted by betrayal. The morning light streamed through windows as I prepared breakfast, listening to the sounds of Emma and Noah getting ready for school upstairs. "Mom, have you seen my science project notes?" Emma called down. "Check the blue folder on the desk," I replied, smiling at the ordinary chaos of family life, a chaos I had once feared lost forever. The aftermath of Brooke's dramatic airport arrest had unfolded with surprising swiftness. Facing multiple federal charges for wire fraud, identity theft, and embezzlement, she had attempted to bargain by implicating Matthew in her schemes. When that failed, she'd pled guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence, 15 years instead of 25. She now resided at a medium-security women's prison in Connecticut, her true nature finally visible to everyone. Matthew had avoided criminal charges but not professional consequences. The Massachusetts Bar Association had opened an ethics investigation into his conduct, resulting in a 1-year suspension of his law license. More significantly, he had lost the respect of colleagues, friends, and most painfully, his children. Our divorce was finalized 3 months after the airport incident, with the court granting me primary custody. Matthew had visitation rights but was struggling to rebuild his relationship with Emma and Noah, who remained angry and confused by his betrayal. "He keeps bringing us presents," Emma had confided after a recent weekend visit. "But he doesn't really listen when we talk." "Give him time," I'd advised, though privately wondering if Matthew would ever truly understand the damage he'd caused. "He loves you, even if he made terrible mistakes." Professionally, my comeback had exceeded even my own expectations. Using seed capital from Richard's inheritance, I had launched Bennett Mitchell Advisors, an independent financial firm built on principles of transparency and ethical management. James Rutherford had become my first client, bringing his considerable portfolio and reputation with him. Other former clients followed, along with new ones attracted by our strict ethical standards. I hired Danielle from Wilson & Hartman, promoting her to Chief Compliance Officer, a position where her integrity and attention to detail could shine. Within 6 months, we were managing over $200 million in assets, with projections to double that by year-end. Wilson & Hartman hadn't fared as well. The SEC investigation had uncovered additional improprieties beyond Brooke's actions, resulting in heavy fines and reputational damage. Elizabeth Hartman had reached out recently, suggesting a merger of our firms, an irony not lost on me. I had politely declined. As I packed lunches for the children, I reflected on Uncle Richard's final gift, not the money, which had indeed transferred to me upon completion of his justice project, but the deeper understanding I'd gained through his journals. I'd continued reading them after Brooke's arrest, discovering Richard's own painful history of betrayal. His business partner in the early days of his career had systematically undermined him, eventually pushing him out of the company they'd founded together. Rather than seeking revenge, Richard had rebuilt methodically, creating something stronger and more enduring than what he'd lost. "Success is the best revenge," he'd written, "but it must be ethical success, or the victory is hollow." His personal experience had made him uniquely attuned to Brooke's manipulations when others, including me, had missed the signs. Now his wisdom guided my rebuilding, not just of my career and family, but of my approach to trust and relationships. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. Calvin Wagner stood on the porch, a folder tucked under his arm. "The final paperwork for the family trust," he explained as I welcomed him in. "Once you sign, Richard's vision will be complete." The Bennett Family Trust was the final condition of the inheritance, a structure designed to provide financial security for future generations, with stringent ethical requirements for beneficiaries. Emma and Noah would have access to educational funds without limitation, but further distributions were tied to community service and ethical business practices. Richard believed wealth without purpose corrupts, Calvin reminded me as I reviewed the documents. He wanted your children protected but not entitled. After Calvin left, I took the afternoon off to visit Richard's estate, a property I'd inherited but had initially planned to sell. The sprawling stone house had stood abandoned for years, its gardens overgrown, its rooms dusty with neglect. But in recent months, I'd begun restoration work, sensing that preserving Richard's legacy was somehow important. Today, I was bringing Emma and Noah for the first time. "It's like a castle," Noah breathed as we drove through the wrought iron gates. Emma, more perceptive, noted the connection immediately. "It has the same doorknobs as our new house. And look, those are the same flowers from our garden." I had indeed incorporated elements of Richard's aesthetic into our new home, finding comfort in these tangible connections to a man I'd never truly known in life. As the children explored the grounds, I sat on a stone bench overlooking the property, the final volume of Richard's journals open beside me. Its concluding entry had become a touchstone for me in moments of doubt. The ultimate test of character is not how we respond to kindness, but how we rebuild after betrayal. Audrey will face this test, and in rising to meet it, she will discover her own strength, not the brittle strength of vindictiveness, but the enduring strength of resilience. This is my final gift to her, not wealth, but the opportunity to discover that even after losing everything, she remains whole. Later that evening, after tucking the children into bed, I joined a video support group I'd begun attending for survivors of identity theft and financial fraud. Many members had stories similar to mine, lives upended by trusted individuals who had systematically stolen their identities, finances, and reputations. When my turn came to speak, I shared not the dramatic details of Brooke's downfall, but the more nuanced lessons of recovery. "The hardest part wasn't losing my possessions or even my reputation," I explained. "It was questioning my own judgment, wondering how I could have missed what now seems so obvious. But I've learned that trust isn't weakness, even when it's betrayed. The capacity to trust, to connect authentically with others, that's actually strength, not vulnerability." A new member, still raw from her own recent betrayal, asked the question I once would have found impossible to answer. "But how do you ever trust anyone again?" I thought of Emma and Noah, of Danielle and Calvin, of James Rutherford, and even of Uncle Richard, people who had stood by me or believed in me when evidence was scarce. "You start by recognizing that most people aren't predators," I replied carefully. "You build stronger boundaries and better discernment, yes. But you also learn to distinguish between healthy skepticism and paralyzing suspicion. Because a life without trust isn't really living, it's just surviving." Later, as I prepared for bed, Emma appeared in my doorway in her pajamas. "I found this," she said, holding out a small wooden box I recognized from Richard's house. "It was in that desk you said I could use for homework." Inside lay a handwritten note and a vintage compass in a brass case. The note, in Richard's distinctive handwriting, was addressed to Emma and Noah. "For my grandniece and grandnephew, whom I regrettably never met, may this compass remind you that even when the path forward seems unclear, you carry the ability to find your true north within yourselves. Your mother has this capacity in abundance. Trust her guidance, and in time, trust your own." I looked up to find Emma studying me intently. "Uncle Richard knew what Aunt Brooke was going to do, didn't he, before it happened?" "He recognized patterns I didn't see," I acknowledged, once again struck by her perceptiveness. "Are we going to be okay now, Mom? Really okay?" I drew her into an embrace, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair. "We're already okay, sweetheart. Different, maybe a little wiser, but completely okay." That night, I added my own entry to Richard's final journal. "Dear Uncle Richard, today I brought your great-niece and great-nephew to your home. They are the true inheritance, not the money or properties, but the legacy of resilience you helped preserve. You once wrote that the ultimate test of character is how we rebuild after betrayal. I'm still rebuilding, day by day, but on a foundation stronger than before. You were right about so many things, but especially this: family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about who sees you clearly when others don't, who believes in your strength when you've forgotten it exists. By that definition, you were more family to me than those who shared my name. I'll make sure Emma and Noah know your story, and through it, understand their own capacity to weather life's storms. With gratitude beyond measure, Audrey. What unexpected betrayal have you experienced in your life, and how did you recover? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you, subscribe for more real-life journeys of resilience, and share with someone who might need to be reminded of their own strength today. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, sometimes the greatest comebacks begin at the moment you think everything is lost.